Hey guys, it's Thursday, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but a few people mentioned to me that an Anita Sarkeesian video was out again, and she went after Ivy Valentine and Cammy and various other characters, and I wanted to briefly respond. I'm not going to do a blow-by-blow, play-by-play breakdown of the video. I want to talk about two things I feel are actually pernicious and harmful, to use those million-dollar words, in the interpretation of video games and of gamers' relationships to these games. And the reason I'm focusing on these is I actually think they are, in fact, harmful in terms of stifling dialogue and also severely mischaracterizing the relationship that gamers have with games and the characters within these games. And I think that the harm comes in stigmatizing gamers, driving the dialogue further underground, making people more defensive, and not giving gamers of all genders the ability to talk about issues regarding sexuality and emotional bonds with characters without there being some very harmful assumptions about the whole thing. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was this idea that, characters like Ivy Valentine, Bayonetta, and Quiet, the idea that their form of dress is to titillate the presumed male audience. I disagree with the idea of presumed male audience, but fine, let's go with it. But the idea that they are there to titillate, and this is seen as an inherently positive thing, and I think that this is a false assumption with these three characters, because the whole idea of these three characters is certainly in the case of Ivy and Bayonetta, they are fallen women. Part of their character is the fact that, under traditional Judeo-Christian morality, they dress like sluts. And that the game is juxtaposing with that. If you know about their stories, this is relevant to their stories. The fact that they are bad girls, and there are very good reasons for this. Now, the assumption that these characters should not exist in games draws upon the idea that only good women, only idealized women should appear in games, and I think that's wrong. The title of the video is called "Lingerie is Not Armor," met with a resounding duh. The idea of fighting games is it's fantasy armor, emphasis on fantasy as much as armor. Both Soul Calibur and Street Fighter pass the He-Man and She-Ra test, which means that are the guys just as naked as the girls, if not more so? Yes, fine, play ball. I mean, there are numerous male characters in Street Fighter that wear less than Cammy. There are, Voldo, I go back to his example because Voldo and Ivy's outfits are both sort of dom gear, because they are somehow enslaved by somebody else. It is bondage gear for a reason. And the similarities in their stories, if you actually break it down, is quite telling. The other thing I think is unfair when you're dealing with fighting games and this idea about sexual titillation and all that stuff, nudity and sex are not the same thing. And characters in fighting games don't actually have sex in game. It's not like romance options in RPGs. It's not the same. If you want to talk about nudity and titillation, fine. But you're talking about nudity. I mean, yes, Ivy Valentine's breasts, there is an argument to be made that that is a deliberate hypersexualization of the character. But again, let's face it, bondage, when you deal with women, sexual bondage, and oppression through sexual Puritan morality is a huge part of the oppression of women. And when you think about it that way, it makes sense that they would make Voldo this sort of skinny, pale dude that creeps people out, and then Ivy this hypersexualized female character. It has to do with oppression and domination and systems of oppression. So there are artistic metaphors that I feel are being lost here. Now, moving on to Quiet, you can argue whether or not this worked in the game. But the whole thing about Quiet is that Quiet is designed to mess with the fact that male players are probably going to perv on her. The character toys with the idea of, does a woman always expect to be presumed to be dressing a certain way to attract men? And this sort of orgasmic shudder when Quiet drinks, and her sort of, rolling around kind of childlike in the rain in that one scene that some people say is sexual. And yes, the camera does invoke what, some feminists call male gaze. Bayonetta does the same thing. In Bayonetta's instance, it is that sort of dark side of sexuality. I mean, don't forget, she's the child of a forbidden union. And, sort of this unaligned sexy chick. It's not just used in video games for a presumed male audience. It's also used in TV shows created by and geared towards women. I mean, the example that comes to mind is Lost Girl, with, Bo the Succubus, created by a woman, huge female fan base. I mean, the dudes are as naked as the women are. The thing about Quiet, getting back to that, is, like I said, you can make an argument that it didn't work as intended. And some people have. I'm not sure what to think yet. I'm really of two minds about it. But there is a huge difference in saying that this creator made an attempt to make us question our assumptions about the way a particular woman dresses, and saying that, no, they shouldn't be doing that at all. Anytime you put a woman in a skimpy outfit, because she's not real, you're taking away her agency. That's kind of foolish, because if we do what Anita Sarkeesian does and take movie and mass media analytical techniques and transfer them into video games, we have to look at the fact that one could claim that every actress who ever wore an article of clothing has no agency. The wardrobe department determined she was going to wear that. But the point is, we're supposed to believe the character chose to dress that way. And that's a character point. Saying none of these women are real, and so it's not a real person's decision, that's a breaking of the fourth wall. That's a misplaced sociological analysis, as opposed to looking at it like a piece of art. That's not fair. That's shifting the paradigm. That's moving the goalpost to create the most negative impression, no matter what the scenario. And I have a real problem with that. I think we have to be consistent in our analytical tools. I think it's fair to take the reality that a piece of art has created and examine that reality on its terms. So, for instance, Quiet only wears so much clothing because she has to breathe. Now the question is, why is she wearing, why isn't she more naked? Why is she wearing those pants on the bottom? I'm not sure about that, but, we can accept that, okay, in this fictional reality, because it's science fiction. I mean, the whole parasite treatment and breathing through her skin, that's not something that the average, the normative woman does. So we have to accept sci-fi on sci-fi's terms. So, all right, fine. Here is a woman who breathes through her skin. In this fictional world of Metal Gear Solid, Quiet has different norms. And you can claim they're silly, and yes, they are. And you can claim that artistically it doesn't work for you. That's valid. But this idea that we're supposed to dismiss the assumption that this particular character dresses that way because she wants to, Well, that's not fair, because you can't then do a deep analysis about what everything else means. Well, it means nothing. You know, if we're going to treat these characters like dolls for the sexual stimulation of a presumed male audience, well, we might as well forget about story and forget about emotional engagement and forget about all the interactivity that game developers bend themselves into pretzels to try to get. And that brings me to the other point that I actually think is of more concern. I think that the feminist frequency method of analysis makes some very dangerous and very sexist assumptions about why male gamers play games and the relationship that male gamers have to characters like Ivy, like Quiet, like Cammy, Cortana, people like that. And this concerns me because the assumption, the presumption, to use their language, is that men consume these games and these female characters are popular because of sexual titillation and only sexual titillation. There's nothing else going on in terms of the interplay between player and character. And I know from talking to many gamers and playing games myself and knowing the reactions I have, that's just not so. And yes, I'm not man, but hey, I like a nice female butt and a pair of boobs as much as anybody. Maybe a little bit more than most people. And so, you know, you do have that moment of, whoa, boobies! But then it's like, okay, what's deeper? And I think that's what's cool about games and what makes games different, is because when you select a character like Ivy or like Cammy, you start a partnership with them. You have to work with them. And if you're spending the whole time staring at that character's assets, Cammy's butt, Ivy's boobs, or, you know, Ivy's everything, you're going to get your butt handed to you in the match. You're going to lose the fight because you're not paying attention. You have to move so quickly that the great thing is that here's a male gamer creating this relationship of mutual respect with, yes, it's a digital woman who cannot reject them. That is true, but it's a start. And I personally think this is something that should be encouraged. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying open season, design the most ridiculous outfits you want. I think that Feminist Frequency's comments on the Resident Evil Revelation costume, that was sort of openly mocked by a lot of people, like, where is the leg of her pants? So I think we can all kind of agree that costume was dumb, but that is the exception that proves the rule. These other costumes are exceptionally deliberate, and this idea, moving on to Cortana, yes, okay, the Halo developer said, yeah, she makes you want to look at her, which I found very interesting. I didn't know that before I saw this video, and I found that quite interesting because for people who don't know, Cortana is based on this scientist in Halo, and I think it's kind of interesting that this scientist, who didn't dress that way in the real world, has this sort of fantasy that in her computer avatar she wants men to look at her. That's very interesting. That is some complexity right there. And I think that we need to show similar complexity in the understanding of how gamers emotionally interact with the games they play. I think it is really unfair to assume that there cannot be an emotional connection with a sexy woman. That's bad thinking. This demonization of the male sex urge, this idea that the minute you find a woman sexually stimulating, you are doing something inherently wrong and disrespectful. I have an issue with this because this does not benefit women. This bottles up the male sex urge to the point of frustration, and then you get bad things happening because men are sent this urge that they're supposed to go out and pork anything that's willing, but they're not supposed to enjoy it. That's really, really, really unhealthy. The idea is that women should be able to wear anything they want. Like, this is what men have been hearing for years, especially in the age of slut walks. The idea that women should be able to wear anything they want, that they dress that way for them because it makes them feel good, and that men should be able to deal with that and find them sexually appealing, but recognize that just because they want a woman doesn't mean they can have a woman. And the assumption that this lingerie is not armor video makes is that what's going on in men's heads is that sexually attractive equals sexually available. And that's not a jump I'm prepared to make. I think that in order to sort of build this bridge in terms of gender in video games, we have to give men more credit for understanding boundaries and understanding limits and understanding a woman's sexual agency. This idea that women are responsible for what men do because of their dress choices. Well, thinking like that is why the slut walks came to be in the first place. This idea that, no, you don't get raped because of the way you dress. And clothing choices do not translate to sexual availability. And that through line disturbed me greatly in this tropes versus women video. I don't know where a feminist gets that from in 2016. Feminists weren't getting that in 1996, okay, when I started learning this stuff. A little older than that, but we won't go there. I don't know, that is counter to all the talking points of modern feminism, the idea that dressing a certain way equals sexual availability. So why is the most prominent feminist in video games perpetuating that myth? That is a rape myth. That if a woman dresses that way, she's sexually available. That is a rape myth. And we have it repeated in a feminist frequency video. And the excuse is that they're not real characters, they're dressed by men, and this is what you're supposed to believe. I don't buy that. I don't believe that game developers designed these women to say, oh, we're making this way so that you want to fuck them without them being able to say no. That's not what they do. I've talked to so many developers. That is not the thinking. Is there some thinking with the small brain instead of the big brain? Sure there is, because games are about fantasy. And a lot of guys who design games want to create these perfect women that they don't believe actually exist and they know they can never have even if they did. Well, guess what? When women turn around and create art, especially pop art, we do the exact same thing. I mean, Twilight. I don't know who Edward Cullen is a perfect man to, but that's the idea. He's so impossibly attractive, and he's so much older than me and more mature, and all this stuff. I mean, every boy band is female libido. Like, why is female libido considered safe, but male libido considered dangerous? Well, this is the sexual gender imbalance that feminism is designed to question and try to balance out. Now, we can't do that if we're perpetuating the idea that the male sex urge is inherently dangerous. No, we should be encouraging guys to go, look, it's cool to look, but don't touch. And I think that it's a real testament to gamers that they've seen all these, hypersexualized images of women, and yeah, sure, some people do some dumb things on the internet, but that's not exclusive to gamers. When you're in a gaming event, it is a respectful environment. One year at San Diego Comic-Con, I was dressed up in like this Little Red Riding Hood, sexy Little Red Riding Hood kind of outfit. It was like a Mezco Scary Tales action figure. And no issues. Everybody was totally cool. Hey, great costume. When I'm in the convention center, cross those tracks, those train tracks, the transit line, and into the Gaslamp district of San Diego. The wolf whistles and the cat calls and the lewd comments started almost immediately. And so the average, cool guy out having dinner in a tourist area in San Diego was a bigger pig to me, dressed in that outfit. They were making assumptions about the kind of attention I wanted to get that nerds in a comic book convention that are maligned for being these demon, evil, repressive women, sexuality demons, they were like, hey, great costume. And I think that we need to start giving guys credit in these spheres for being able to do that, because I know what it's like to do the best you can, to feel like you're doing what you've been told to do and still being told you're bad anyway. That's what's happening to male gamers. And that's what's happening to women gamers who don't want to wear friggin' burqas, because of this expectation that if you're not covered up, you're some sort of gender traitor, because there's no way in hell you could possibly want to dress this way for yourself. So if you're saying it's okay for a woman to dress like that in the real world, which is the cover they're trying to use, then you can't then turn around and shame the depictions of women who fictionally choose to dress that way in a game because you think men dress them for other men. You can't have it both ways. Either media influences reality, not just reflects, but influences reality, or you're saying media reflects reality. If media influences reality, well, it doesn't matter who came up with the idea to dress a woman that way. Either we consider it morally okay in our culture, or we don't. Now, if media just reflects culture instead of influencing culture, well, then we can't really blame it for reflecting the way women dress. And I mean the popularity of some of these characters, especially Cammy. There's so many Cammy cosplayers. And there's some fine butts in Cammy cosplay. But either way, it's the impact and choices of real life women that should matter in this equation, and you cannot have it both ways. If it is okay for women to dress that way in the real world, then don't shame the depictions in media. If you think that media is harmful that depicts these images, well, then you are, in fact, through the back door, shaming women who dress that way in the real world. There is no way around that. It is double talk. It is double talk. And unfortunately, philosophy rooted in Marxism is full of this doublethink. And unfortunately, there are portions of feminism that have not been able to shake off the fact that most first wave and many second wave feminists were also Marxists. That doesn't mean that feminism is inherently Marxist. It means that there's this intersection point that we have to be acutely aware of. And when you pivot to where feminism intersects with the capitalist world, you get very, very different results. And the difference is because it's capitalism versus socialism, not feminism. But getting back to the idea of men and the male sex urge being demonized. I've had some very deep conversations with guys about this stuff, and what I'm getting from gamers is this idea of, will feminism please tell us what sexual feelings are healthy for a man to express, because it seems like it's eliminated everything. And that's a fair complaint, because looking at it from the outside, I can see this whole, everything we do is wrong. If we look but don't touch, we know that touching a woman without her consent is wrong, but now if we look but don't touch, that's wrong too. My God, I'm wired this way. There's nothing I can do about it. I do understand a guy watching this video and going, my God, this woman thinks that every time I get an erection, it's evil. And that comes down to this whole thing that creating titillation for a presumed male audience is inherently somehow bad. We can't function based on that paradigm. Professional sports is made for a presumed male audience. Are we supposed to believe that the tight white pants of football players are designed to titillate the audience? Well, that's not the assumption most people make about the reason for those tight white pants. But let me tell you, I have some male friends who are gay, and they very much like the tight white pants. They don't care about football. They want to see the guys bent over in the tight pants. And that is fine. If that's what they enjoy, they're not going to go out and molest a football player. They just like to look. And there are women that like to look as well. You know, don't be fooled by this stuff. Do not be fooled that this idea that women are not visual creatures. It is a myth. It is a myth. We're learning more and more that women are just so bent about sexuality, that women are given so little license to admit that they're feeling aroused, that women will deny feeling aroused even when, you know, measurement tools are indicating stuff going on in the lady bits. And this is important to realize, like, that's how crushed the sex urge still is. And part of feminism to me is fighting that, and the ongoing demonizing of male sexuality in the Tropes versus Women series is just not doing that.